Art Chansky, Carolina grad, was in school with this guy 50 years ago. I was a journalism major. He was an art TV MP major. And yeah, we stuck up a friendship with, like he did with a number of people who he's reconnected since he moved back to Chapel Hill, including Bob Holliday and Alex Julian and so many others too. And I stayed in touch. So he was doing work for WCHL. I was with the Tar Heel and then the Durham Morning Herald and doing stringing work for CHL. So that's how we knew each other. You know, we kind of knew how much each of us made. Like I made $5 for every one of my sports notebooks. Jim made, I think, $80 a month. And then we found out, we learned the story later, we found out he is got the job to be the first ever college sideline reporter, college football. And you know, Linda, Linda Lee Lampley, his first wife, was part of the group and would tell us when the first game was. And we were a group of us got together, and I can't tell you how proud we were to see the game come on at the docks next to Neyland Stadium in Knoxville before the UCLA Tennessee season opener in 1974. And in the distance, as they were showing the wide shot, in the distance we saw a figure. We weren't even sure it was a person. But the thing that we saw,
it wasn't a person, it was me.
It was a yellow sport jacket, yellow blazer. And that figure started coming closer and closer and getting closer. And soon we saw that it was Jim Lambley walking down the dock with a microphone, welcoming everybody. Now in Tennessee, they have 100,000 people in their stadium. Not all of them, but a lot of them take their boats and yachts or whatever it is and park them right next to the stadium. So Jim was there talking to some of those people, but camera went on and he was introducing college football in 1974. And we were so proud of what he did. And we stayed friends while they lived in Chapel Hill, but then he had to move to New York because his job was getting bigger and bigger. So we stayed in touch a little bit over the years and still was so proud of everything that he did, everywhere he went, every sport that he covered, and it's all in, it happened. It's absurd how many things he's done in sports, and that's because he's talented, gets opportunity after opportunity, and he's a workaholic, right? He's a workaholic. So let's flash forward 50 years, right? Jim and Deborah moved back to Chapel Hill, and we kind of reconnect, and we started having lunch, and I said, tell me what happened in the last 50 years. And that's like the tip-off question of all time. You know, that begins the flow of story after story after story. And I guess it was the second lunch when I said, Jim, you know, you need to write a book. And he said, no, I'm not a writer, I'm a broadcaster. And I said, no, you need to write a book so your stories live forever. He said, no, I'm a broadcaster, but I am going to do I'm planning to do a podcast series. And I said, okay, a podcast series, you can do podcasts and that can promote the book and the book can promote the podcast and all that. And so I said, what have you done with the podcast so far? I said, well, I've written some scripts that cover the subjects that I would talk about in each one of the podcasts. So I said, could you send me a couple? He said, sure. So he sent me a couple, and I read them, and I held up, and I said, how many of these do you have? He said about 20, 25. I said, send me all of them, because the first two were so good that I knew they could be the basis for a chapter and really the basis for a book, that you take that story and you elaborate on it, more details and all that. And it took about a year. Did it take about a year for you to say, hello, yes, we'll do it? So, and I've done a lot of books, so I was connected. I knew some agents, knew some publishers, and we found an agent, we found a publisher. And Jim knew exactly what he wanted the title to be. He knew exactly what he wanted to put in the book. And he is a superb storyteller. My job was to get the book in the proper order. So the big book was a big story, and each of the chapters, in the book were smaller stories that led us, through his career.
And to deal with the publisher, because you spoke their language.
Yes.
I did not.
Exactly. And so, after several Zooms and meetings like that, we we're on our way, and it's Ben Bella Publishing with the Matt Holt imprint. Very good publisher. And one of the things that we talked about at the beginning was, you know, not anybody can publish a book, but anybody can publish a book. But the thing that we wanted to do is make sure that they had a good marketing plan. And they have a great marketing plan. And we've been local, national, regional, all over the place. And they're still in the middle of it. They just came back from California where they were all over the place, you know, signing them. How's your hand? Signing a gazillion books, right?
Well,
So
everything has deteriorated. My handwriting, my hand, et cetera, et cetera.
So one of the
We're
things,
grinding.
Jim knows John Grisham, and I know John a little bit too. And I saw John speak at the Carolina campus one time, up right in front of the South Building, and I remember he said the only bad book that he ever wrote, in his estimation, was the one that I didn't outline. So I took that to heart, and I try to outline every book that I've done, and I said, Jim, we have to outline this book. Leave it to me. You just tell stories, send them to me, we'll make them, if it's short of detail, we'll get the detail. If it's long in detail, we'll cut what we have to cut, and we'll put it together. And we've put together a book. He might not have been able to do it without me because I had the mechanics of it, but there's no way in the world anybody could write a book like this without him. His stories are incredible. Everybody who reads this book, my brother, older brother in Boston, I sent him a copy. He's very critical about everything. He just wrote me yesterday and went, wow, what a book. Everywhere, you know, all these sports that I saw growing up and so forth. So I think enjoyable read is the comment that we get most of the time. So we're here to talk about the book a little bit. I'm here really to referee, because when Jim starts talking about the book, he's liable to tell you too much, to the point where you're not going to want to get the book. So when I go like this, right, that's the sign for him to stop the story, and this means book. You see how that story winds up in the book. And that's the way it was. So, you know, it started, you start anywhere you want, but I mean, it started with first of some of the most amazing coincidences, and just good things happened to Jim, and then some bad things happened to Jim, but he always recovered. Like, you know, to make a long story short, he ABC, CBS, NBC, Showtime a little bit, right? You know,
One show.
yeah, and then HBO, 30 years, the face and voice of championship boxing on HBO. And he when HBO dropped boxing, which is the stupidest thing they've ever done, he was doing chat sessions from fights on ppv.com, and he'll tell you about Turkey, but one of the richest guys
On the planet.
You know, on the planet, boxing enthusiast. He wanted to do live boxing bouts in New York, and Jim just got back by ringside, did blow by blow for 3 fights in Times Square. Can you imagine that? Turkey set up a whole boxing ring with, I guess, bleachers all the way around, right?
3 fights.
Yeah.
They were so bad, it was epic. The fighters somehow completely failed to perform for the biggest paychecks they'll ever see in their careers. And it was completely inexplicable, unless you think that they were muffled and debilitated by the humidity in Times Square. That was the only possible explanation for how fighters who are naturally and in most instances unfailingly violent stood and posed in Times Square and looked at each other. A friend of mine had a great line. He said, "It's really hard to do blow by blow when there are no blows." And that's absolutely true. So yeah, I came back. I made my long-awaited return to blow by blow at ringside, working for this Arab sheikh who wants to take over boxing the way that the Saudis have already taken over golf. And the fighters just blanked. And so I did it, but
they might have been blinded by the figure on the check.
Could have been.
Right?
Could have been. At any rate, yeah, I'm back.
Yeah, and we're so happy to have Jim and Deborah back in Chapel Hill. They're tremendous members of the community, involved in everything. You know, their good friend Randy Emmerman is here. Randy had the Film Fest 919 for 4 years until COVID came, and it was a film festival. It was feature film festival, and it had 74 Academy Award nominations. More than that.
38 winners.
And then Oscars, it's 24 Oscars in 4 years. That's how the contacts that Randy and her partner Carol Marshall had to bring those films to Chapel Hill. And I helped Randy out a little bit, but I was so excited because I've been in Chapel Hill a long time, and I always heard the phrase town and gone. Let's do things together, town and gone. And you know, I've always thought it was the biggest BS of all time, because the town wants to do what it does, the university wants to do what it does, and they can never really get together. I thought Film Fest was the one thing. This might be stupid, we think it could have been another Sundance or Telluride or something like that, but we just got, like a lot of other people, got stung by COVID. So Jim is touring the country. I'm doing some of the local ones with him. I am going to New York in June for the UNC Alumni Club, which I think, Deborah, is one of the biggest alumni clubs. Yeah, with a great guy named David German, and we're really looking forward to that. Who are you hosting that with? Do we know that?
Unknown.
Unknown.
There's a couple of people who have been invited.
Well,
it might be you, Art. I mean,
we'll get somebody big time. So let Jim tell a little bit about the process of writing the book, the fun he had with it, how hard it was for him, how easy it was for him, and if he gets to the point where he's about to tell something. Go ahead, fire away.
Thank you. I could not have done this without Art's assistance and organizational acumen. But I decided to write the book partially because Art was pushing me to write the book, and which was intelligent, and also because I had cycled through just about everything else that you can do in communications, from having been the first sideline reporter, first person ever on the sideline of a football game with a camera and a microphone back in 1974, through my apprenticeship at ABC Sports, mostly doing all the wacky, esoteric, wide world of sports events that all the other older, more veteran announcers on the staff had already done 3 or 4 times each. And now I became the first person on the staff who had to go do the wrist wrestling, the lumberjacks, the demolition derby, the motorcycles on ice, et cetera, year after year after year. The older announcers, Keith Jackson, Chris Schenkel, Frank Gifford, Bill Fleming, all of them Hall of Fame candidate types with long, decorated careers at ABC, hated me at first because I was so clearly a gimmick hired right out of college, rubbing shoulders with them in meetings and at events and stuff like that, going to the Olympics, and they all were very somewhat discomfited by that. Then eventually they realized, oh, this person is going to have to go back to the wrist wrestling, the lumberjacks, the motorcycles on ice, the demolition derby, et cetera, every year until he's finished with his apprenticeship. So now they liked me because they didn't have to go back and do those things that they had already done so many times before. And then eventually I was in that process and paying my dues at ABC, and Wide World began to adventure into and pioneer what became known as ultra endurance sports. The Ironman triathlon in Hawaii, a 100-mile foot race in Squaw Valley, California, and then eventually the ultimate, a thing called the Race Across America, which was a 3,100-mile bicycle race from Santa Monica Pier to the Empire State Building, and then eventually the route changed around. But I wound up doing the first 5 Race Across Americas, and the first 3 or 4 Ironman triathlons, again, because I was paying my dues on Wide World, but now I had these events that you could see were going to gain a foothold, were going to achieve an audience, and it wasn't the wacky stuff that the lumberjacks and the wrist wrestling and all of that was. It was extensions of the marathon. The marathon had class, the marathon had dignity. Now you know, I remember when I was first sent to do the Ironman triathlon in Honolulu, 1982 or 1981. I had been at ABC about 7 years. And there had been an article in Sports Illustrated about the first Ironman triathlon that had taken place in December of the year before. And the first edition of the event had 13 people. And reputedly, 9 of them had finished, swim 2.5 miles, bike 112 miles, run a marathon, all in one package. And when I was sent to Honolulu, the first question the executives wanted me to cover is, does this actually happen? Can you verify and validate to us that people actually do go into the water and swim 2.5 miles and then ride a bike 112.5 miles and then run a marathon all continuously in one package? And I remember midway through the first 4 or 5 hours of watching it, I went to a phone and called an executive in New York and said, "Yep, they do this. I promise you, these are real human beings, and it's clear what they're going to do." And wound up moving in either the second or third year, I don't remember which, but there were so many people entering the Ironman triathlon that they had to move it out of Honolulu, out of the bay in front of the Outrigger Canoe Club, had to go to the Big Island to get more water space for the 1,000 or more people who were going into the water to start the triathlon. And that was the year that a young woman named Julie Moss led the bike race portion among the women, then had come out of the swim in second or third place, led all the way through the bike race portion, was running the marathon, was well ahead of all the other women, and collapsed in the street in Kailua Kona, Hawaii, about 200 yards short of the finish line. And collapsed and lost all function, was flopping around in the street like a fish out of water, literally trying to gain some purchase to try to stand up or something. Spectators wanting to reach out and help her. Race officials yelling, "No, you can't touch her, you can't do anything to help her, because if you do, you get her disqualified." She's still the leader among the women. And as she's lying there, her body evacuates all her fluids. It's in some ways a disturbing scene, but officials want to give her every chance to finish. And as she's lying there, another San Diego woman named Kathleen McCartney came running by. And an official at the finish line pointed to the tape and said, "Step through." And Kathleen, confused because she knew she had been behind Julie Moss the whole race and had not seen her on the pavement when she ran right by her, stopped and looked at the tape and looked at that official. And the official said, "Step through. You're the winner." And Kathleen McCartney stepped through the tape and became the winner of what became known around the whole endurance sports world as the Julie Moss Triathlon. It was never known as the Kathleen McCartney Triathlon. It was always the Julie Moss Triathlon, because the drama that we put on ABC's Wide World of Sports ultimately climaxed around this scene of the young woman lying in the street and officials having to push spectators back literally to keep them from helping her. Well, that made a dent in terms of an audience. That became something that was written about, people talked about it, et cetera, et cetera.
Got into Sports Illustrated too, right?
Yeah, got a Sports Illustrated article. The Ironman that was early 80s. The Ironman triathlon now is a $500 million global property. All because these people had the vision to figure out that not only was it doable, but people would do it, and everyday people would do it, et cetera, et cetera. So I was the first to get the chance to do that kind of thing, and there were a lot of other firsts and unusual opportunities for me at ABC, and I had 13 wonderful years there, and I went to my first several Olympics at ABC, and then